Hello, and thank you for joining us today for Franklin's webinar, Yogi Berra, Change Consultant. And we're going to give you guys a couple more seconds for a few people to come on in. I see people joining us as we begin, so just hold on tight for a second, and the next voice you'll hear will be Scott Franklin. Thank you.
Well, hello, everyone. This is Scott Franklin with Lifecycle Engineering, and welcome to today's webinar on Yogi Berra, Change Consultant. Many of you know Yogi Berra from his sports career, but may be unfamiliar that he actually started off as a change consultant. Early in his change management career, Yogi Berra was advising a professional sports organization in New York on some of the finer points of managing change. At the executive briefing, Yogi delivered his change management theory overview, which he summed up in the single statement: you've got to be very careful if you don't know where you're going, because you might end up someplace else. What Yogi was expressing to us is the fact that when starting any change, you got to start at the very beginning of visualizing what the change is, knowing where you're headed. And regardless of how dramatic or transformational the change is, there is a structured process or steps, methodical steps to the change. Starts off with the step one. Stage one is the visualize stage, where you get an idea of where you're headed, where you're going, which is what Yogi Berra was referring to, knowing where you're going. The second stage would be the preparation stage. So once you know where you're going, how to prepare for the journey. You design it, what the end state's going to look like, actually build it into the design, the structure and processes that you're going to be following, deploy it, and the fifth stage is sustain it. But we're going to start off, this WebEx is going to study primarily the base stage, the visualize stage. Stephen Covey referred to this as all things are created twice. What he's talking about is the first creation is in the mind. It's the designing it in your head or in theory or in philosophy or designing out what the change is going to look like. Once you get it in your head, then you can start building it in reality. And he summed it up with, begin with the end in mind. And again, Yogi Berra phrased it very well, where you've got to be very careful if you don't know where you're going, because you might end up someplace else. In this stage, one of the first things you do is find a compelling reason for change. The reason why. To start a change, people need to understand the reason for a change. They've got to understand what's driving this, so they can accept it within themselves to move away from the current state. There's usually we find that we can generally identify about four major categories for a compelling reason for change. One tends to be the most obvious: external demands or continuous improvement. For example, if you have regulatory requirements that require you to change, a merger, an acquisition, selling, buying a plant. Those are external demands that will require significant change. However, there are some that are internally driven. One main driver could be dissatisfaction with the current state. For example, if you've had a problem with safety records or safety at your plant with injuries or possibly even deaths, the desire just to make the workplace environment much more safe would be a very significant driver to changing the organization. The third one would maybe be threats to the future, where you're truly looking at that the current state won't sustain you in the future. Things may be fine now, but leaders tend to are actually expected to look forward beyond right now and what's coming up, and amplifying those threats to the organization to let the organization know that although it may look fine now, that we're not prepared to be competitive or strategically placed for the future. And the fourth one is aspiration, just wanting to get better. Sports teams go through this all the time, where they just decide they want to win the pennant or win the Stanley Cup or be at the top of their division. And they decide that they're setting a goal for a higher change, even though there's no threat to the future, and they may be perfectly comfortable in their current state. So these can drive the changes. And one of the things to remember is that a mistake that can be made is to assume that the reason for change is obvious or it's compelling. We often hear leaders say, everybody should understand this. It should be obvious. Well, it isn't always obvious. That's not always true. Or they should say that if it is obvious, they do understand it, then they'll clearly want to get on board. Again, don't underestimate comfort. People can be comfortable, and they may want to get on board with a change. It's just not right now, and they can push the change out. The second step in the visualize is creating a shared vision of the future. This is a state where we have to answer these questions. They have to be answered by every person within the organization, such as, why are we doing this? They want to know what it looks like. And these are going to be answered primarily the business reasons, the big business reasons, going back to the compelling reason to change. Why are we doing this, and what does the change look like? Then the next three questions tend to get much more personal. What's in it for me? How is this change really going to help me in my life and where I am? What do I give up? This is one we can generally tend to overlook and maybe try to take things away from people or stop things that they're comfortable with and hope they don't notice. Well, that doesn't work out very well. So taking the time to identify what we're expecting people to give up, so that when we present the change, we can answer the questions about what's going on, what's in it for them, but also what they tend to potentially lose in the change. And the last one is, what do you expect of me? Everybody wants to know, or oftentimes will explain a change at a higher level, or we call it the 30,000-foot level, the business reasons, but we generally can tend to get a little less detail on what the actual expectations are of the individuals. And that's where the change really has to take place, is at the individual level. So answering those questions, going through the effort to make sure we can answer those questions for everyone that's affected by the change, allows us to build that shared vision of the future. So they now know what it is, where we're headed, and what's expected of them. The third step is actually to define the size of the change. And we look at change as two extremes. One's just a technical change or a complex change. And there's four areas we look at there. The first one is in the challenges. Is it the challenge is technical in nature or cultural? Technical would be, for example, a significant software upgrade or installation of new technology. But mostly people are going to have to learn how to use the new technology. A complex change, you're really changing the culture of the organization, or you're redesigning the organization from scratch, a complete redesign of the organization. And you're asking people to think differently or work differently within the organization, or the way we do things around here is another way of saying it. From the needs point of view, in a technical change, it's knowledge, skills, and ability. We give them we give training, and allow them to, and that should allow them to, the challenges they face are going to be based on just learning more or getting more information and learning how to act in the new situation. In a complex change, we're talking about paradigms and beliefs, changing how people think, how they behave. And it was, or a good definition of behaviors are beliefs turned into actions. So if we're really changing how people act in the organization, changing their mental models, we're getting into a complex change. The scope, when we're working within organizational bounds, then the scope tends to be a little more technical in nature, that we're working with a group that we have control over. Complex change, we're oftentimes forced to work across organizational bounds. Or not forced, the change requires us to work across organizational bounds. We see that when we're implementing a reliability program. The organization, there's the increasing the reliability of the equipment in an organization. The reliability is based on the design, the purchase, what's purchased, the operations, and the maintenance. And each of those are optimized around their areas. When you're improving the reliability, you have to improve in all those areas. So in the design stage, you have to design it for long-term use. In the purchasing stage, you can't necessarily buy the cheapest part. You have to buy the parts that sustain the reliability of the equipment. You have to operate it differently, and you also have to maintain it. Rather than how fast you can fix it, it's how much you reduce and remove the root causes of the problems. That requires working across organizational bounds, much more complex change. And then the measures and rewards. In a technical change, you generally adjust the measures and rewards and how people are measured on the quality of their work. In a complex change, your complete redesign or replacement of the measurement system. The people are held accountable for completely different activities and completely different results. So this allows us to start sizing the change. If you look across the bottom, we have the technical change and the complex change, and so we can size it from identifying which end of the spectrum. To the left is a technical change, to the right is complex. So the next thing we look at is going to be our organizational readiness. How ready are we to make the change? We look at some of the factors that are involved there. First off, is there an executive sponsor with sufficient authority? Is the reason for change believed? We get back into the compelling reason for change. How much do people accept the fact that a change needs to happen? Or more importantly, how many accept the fact that the change needs to happen now? Looking at the power distribution within the organization, is it centralized or distributed? If it's centralized, you can direct the change more. It's easier to direct a change. If it's distributed power sources where they have a lot of powerful managers within the organization, you've got to get all of them on board. So that makes the change a little more complicated, a little more complicated to execute. Taking a look at organizational history. Is the past change experience positive? If people, when faced with a change, are looking back and saying that we had well-managed change before. If you did, your organization is much more likely to trust in the future change. If you've had poor change history, you're going to get a lot more resistance. And then the last one is there too much change already underway? When people feel overwhelmed with the change, sometimes they just go into a protective mentality or hunker down. And we take a look on the left, if we take a look at change ready or change resistance, between these two factors, the technical or complex or the change ready, change resistance, we can determine how much effort we need to be putting into managing the people side of the change. So a complex change in a change-resistant organization, we go up to that top right quadrant. That's a high level of investment in change management. When we say a high level of change management, what we mean is that the sponsorship level has to be higher. May have to even go up to the CEO of the company to get all the functions within the organization aligned. We've got to spend a lot more time on communication, put together a formal, structured communication plan. Training is a big part, and a lot of this has to be with training on how to manage change. Coaching, especially the first-line supervisors and managers, helping them manage the change, because oftentimes they have a lot of technical expertise, but they really don't have a lot of change management expertise. So providing them some coaching along the way as we get through this change. And then the last one is the amount of time we spend managing resistance. What we found is resistance is integral to change. If you're not having resistance, you're not changing much. The working number we use for how often you'll find resistance in a change is 100%. You'll always find resistance to a change. So you need to plan for it and then put together resistance management plans. And all those take time and effort. And the last one is, and this one we're going to discuss in greater detail, is connecting the business results to critical behaviors. This is an area where we often fall or come up short in that we give the change or describe the change in very high level or general terms. But as we learn that the definition of insanity is doing the same thing and expecting different results. So that means if we want different results, people have to do things differently. And the change projects we undertake, the intention is to get different results. What we want to do is create a clear line of sight between the project and actual behaviors, what individuals are doing differently. And it goes through there's 4 steps to that allow us to create that information. The first is identifying what the project is. Then we go to the next step is what is the purpose of this project? What are the business reasons that we're doing this? The next step is into the changes. What actual changes have to take place? And then behaviors, what do people have to do to make those changes? If you want to take this exercise, you can do it yourself by just taking a piece of paper and marking 3 lines down within the page to create 4 columns. So we take a look at the project. I'll give you an example of one that we've done is the implementation of a CRM program, Client Relationship Management Program. So we looked at the project to develop to increase our ability to manage our client base. So the purpose was to have an integrated client base where all interactions with the clients could be recorded. That way we could keep track and not send duplicates and and have more organized campaign programs. So one of the changes was we had to document all interactions with the clients. What the behavior would have to come to that is with the sales staff and the operations staff is they would document and connect all emails, phone calls, and any other interactions with the client back to their record in the CRM system. So we wouldn't get the value of the implementation of the consolidated database or consolidated tracking of client interactions unless every person documented their actions. That was a clear line of sight between the project and the behaviors. So that starts us with the visualize stage. When we go through those steps within visualize, that allows us to get a very clear picture of the future, which we can then start designing or preparing for in the next stage and design those in and design in the behaviors, the specific behaviors, and allow us to coach our people into those behaviors and measure them on the performance of those behaviors. So as we're reminded from Yogi Berra, just be careful if you don't know where you're going because you might end up someplace else. Thank you. I'm Scott Franklin with Lifecycle Engineering, and that concludes Yogi Berra, Change Consultant. If you want to find out more about the other steps or even more about this one, you can contact me at the number listed or through the Institute. I also run a blog on the at lc.com/blog, and our Institute provides training in all these areas, learning consultants, public and private classes, and high-impact learning. You can always get us at www.lce.com. And also, please help us out in improving and providing information you need. When you complete this, you'll be asked to participate in a short survey, and we always appreciate the comments and information we get from those. So again, thank you. Have a nice day.